At 55, a man sat on the ground, half clad in armor, his sword resting in one battered hand. Bruises and exhaustion covered him like a second skin, and as he gazed forward, a thought crept into his mind. What the hell was he even doing at his age? Most men his age were settling into retirement, enjoying the quiet comforts of a well-earned rest, but here he was, bloodied and beaten, fresh from yet another battle. A sigh slipped past his lips as the realization settled in. His life? A complete failure. As if the universe wanted to rub salt into his wounds, a pack of monsters loomed ahead, their glowing eyes locked onto him, eager for the kill. No time for self-pity, apparently. Watching them, he found himself wondering, why? Exactly, was he a failure? The thought gnawed at him, but before it could take root, he pushed himself up to his feet, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the weight of his own thoughts. The monsters clearly had no intention of giving him even a moment to catch his breath. Fine, if that was how they wanted to play it. A deafening roar shattered the air as the beasts lunged toward him, and he did what he had done his whole life. He raised his sword and prepared to meet them head-on. And as steel clashed with claw and fang, another thought whispered through his mind. The others from his generation were hailed as legends, draped in titles like Sword Saint or Sword God. Their names carried awe and admiration. And him? Just an old man with a sword. A relic of a past era. Some even had the nerve to call him a swordsman with dementia. But titles meant nothing in a fight. And if they thought he was just some washed-up relic, well, he was more than happy to prove them wrong. Just like in every dramatic tale where someone's life flashes before their eyes right before death comes knocking, Sang-yoon found himself slipping into his past. A past drenched in darkness. He had been just a boy back then, a nameless orphan growing up in a cramped, run-down orphanage. No family, no real future. Just a handful of other kids who were just as lost as he was, and a kind teacher who did her best to keep them all together. But then the monsters came. The memory hit like a dagger to the gut. The orphanage, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a slaughterhouse. The sight burned into his mind. His teacher, the only mother figure he had ever known, struggling against a monstrous grip, her feet dangling above the ground. She had looked at him then, tears streaming down her face, and called out his name, Sang-yoon. She told him not to be afraid, promised that she would be all right, as if her body wasn't already trembling in terror. And then she told him to run. He never got the chance. In the next breath, her head was ripped clean off her shoulders. Blood sprayed through the air like a grotesque rain, and Sang-yoon could do nothing but stand there, frozen, as his world shattered in front of him. One by one, the others fell. The kids who had been like siblings to him. The only family he had ever known. Not a single soul made it out alive. It had all started when the collapse tore through the skies. When the heavens cracked open and rained down monsters, stealing away everything Sang-yoon had ever loved. But even after all of that, even after watching the life he had known get swallowed whole by the abyss, he did not despair. Because just as death came to claim him, a miracle happened. The monster holding him captive had been seconds away from ending it all when, out of nowhere, a woman clad in knight's armor appeared. And with a single swing of her sword, she cleaved the beast apart like it was nothing more than a bad dream. Back then, she had smiled at him, gentle, warm, as if the blood-soaked battlefield around them didn't exist. She had asked if he was okay, her voice calm, steady. And in that moment, Sang-yoon could barely process the fact that he was still breathing. He had been so sure he was going to die, so sure that this was the end. But it wasn't. Tears had welled up in his eyes as he looked at the woman, realizing that fate had handed him another chance at life. And now, standing amidst the corpses of countless monsters, he wasn't about to waste it. His grip on his sword tightened. The fire in his chest burned brighter. That nameless knight, the one who had saved him all those years ago, had inspired him to become stronger, to be someone who could stand against the darkness just like she did. Giving up now? Not an option. But no matter how many times he swung his sword, no matter how many monsters fell at his feet, something gnawed at him. a truth he couldn't escape. He wasn't getting any stronger. No grand awakening. No surge of power. Just the same old Song-yoon, desperately trying to fight battles he had no hope of winning. And because of that, he had failed. Again and again. He hadn't been able to protect his comrades. He hadn't been able to protect anything. Now, with the last of the monsters finally slain, he planted his sword into the ground, his breath coming out in ragged gasps. His body screamed in protest, every muscle on the verge of giving out. Yeah, this was bad. Real bad. If another wave of enemies showed up, he wasn't sure he had it in him to keep going. Just as Song-yoon was finally catching his breath, something massive shifted in the distance. His gaze lifted, and there it was, a dragon-like monster towering over him, easily 100 times his size. Fantastic. Just what he needed. Staring up at the beast, he let out a bitter chuckle. No dreams. No home. No family. Just an old man swinging a sword, piling up regrets like they were collectibles. Some legacy. If life was a game, he had lost a long time ago. Meanwhile, the dragon was busy gathering an absurd amount of magic, its body crackling with energy as it prepared to turn him into ash. Song-yoon sighed, rubbing his forehead as reality sank in. Yep, he was in serious trouble this time. And honestly, if the universe was taking requests, he wouldn't mind a little regression right about now. Maybe send him back 30 years, let him make some better life choices. Before he could dwell on that thought, a glowing screen popped up in front of him. Congratulations. Dungeon cleared. Ancient Dragon's Nest. Song-yoon blinked, then let out a deep breath. After everything, he had actually won? Looking at the notification, he muttered to himself, wondering why he was even working this hard. Almost 60 years old and still running around swinging a sword like some rookie adventurer. 30 years as a swordsman. And what did he have to show for it? Sure, he had cracked the top 100 in his country, but in a world flooded with players, that wasn't exactly impressive. He was just another name lost in the sea of stronger, more talented warriors. As he was drowning in self-reflection, something shimmered in front of him. A book, glowing faintly as it floated in midair. His reward? A skill book, maybe? He eyed it for a moment, then tilted his head. He had eaten artifacts before. Purely for their effects, of course, so the real question was, could he eat the book too? Just as Song-yoon was seriously debating whether or not he could eat the book, the system chimed in with an announcement. Constellation, late bloomer model student has entered. Oh, great. That guy. A portal shimmered open, and out stepped an unknown figure. Song-yoon's contracted constellation. The mysterious being spoke in some ancient, unintelligible language. And for a second, Song-yoon just stood there, nodding like he totally understood. Thankfully, the system was on top of things. Your contracted constellation sincerely blesses you for your hard work. Additionally, he compliments you on your impeccable final strike against the dragon. Hearing that, Song-yoon straightened up a little. Praise? For him? Well, that was rare. He shot a glance at his constellation and gave a small nod of gratitude. It wasn't every day someone actually acknowledged his efforts. He had always been grateful to this constellation. After all, the guy had contracted with him back when he was just a struggling, third-rate swordsman. No talent, no prospects, just stubbornness and bad life choices. And yet, this constellation had chosen him. Before he could get too sentimental, the system popped up again, flashing a new notification right in his face. Player Song-yoon's status. Late bloomer model student. Once player reaches level 850, all artifact and title stats will be doubled. Upon reaching level 900, the said stats will be tripled. Song-yoon stared blankly at the screen, then sighed. He was still stuck at level 650. Honestly, he had yet to see any actual benefits from having this constellation. The conditions were insane. He had to grind for hundreds of levels before his supposed overpowered perks even kicked in. Meanwhile, other players got game-breaking abilities right away. He glanced at his contractor, who looked as serene as ever. Yeah, totally worth the contract. The late bloomer model student constellation nudged Song-yoon, urging him to go ahead and eat the skill book. Song-yoon scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. He was going to do that anyway. No need for the extra pressure. Devour artifacts. That was the one and only skill he had awakened with. And figuring out how it worked? Well, that had been a journey. At first, he had taken a name a little too literally. He had boiled artifacts. He had fried them. He had even considered making an artifact stew at one point. But no matter how many enchanted trinkets he chewed through, nothing ever happened. No power-ups, no hidden abilities, just a mouth full of regret. By the time he finally cracked the mystery, realizing that he needed to sync his mana with an artifact of the right rank for the skill to activate, 30 years had already gone by. And by then, every other hunter had shot past him, unlocking flashy abilities the moment they awakened while he was out here running an accidental artifact-tasting business. With that long, painful history in mind, Sang Yoon held the skill book in his hands, willing it to do something. Anything. But nope. Nothing. No energy surge. No mystical glow. Just a stupid book sitting there, mocking him. Annoyed, he gritted his teeth and muttered that at the very least, the thing should have come with instructions. How was he supposed to know if this was even a real skill book? With an irritated grunt, he threw it to the ground. His constellation, who had been watching all of this unfold, jolted in surprise. The system translated the constellation's hurried words. Apparently, there was very little known information about devour artifacts. The constellation even apologized for not being able to offer much guidance. But then, in that ever-so-patient minor tone, he added that there was still plenty of time. No need to get discouraged. Sang Yoon just had to compromise and start mana synchronization again. Sang Yoon pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a long sigh. Yeah, compromise. That was easy to say when you weren't the one swallowing random magic junk like some kind of enchanted trash compactor. The moment his constellation casually mentioned that he still had plenty of time, something inside Sang Yoon snapped. Time? Time? He whipped around, fixing the celestial being with a sharp glare, his voice carrying the full weight of his frustration as he demanded to know who had ever said he had time left to waste. He was almost 60. 60. If he had a kid at 30, that kid would be pushing 30 by now. Hell, if he had started even earlier, he might already have grandkids running around, calling him Grandpa Sang Yoon while he sat on a porch somewhere, complaining about back pain and telling stories of his youth. But no, instead, he was here, swinging a sword, fighting for his life, still chasing after a dream that was slipping further and further away. He crossed his arms and shot a look at his contractor, making sure the celestial being really understood. Unlike constellations, who had all the time in the world, humans had an expiration date. Sang Yoon's was creeping closer every day. He didn't have centuries to wait around for some grand awakening. He didn't want to die an old man filled with nothing but regrets. His constellation, looking visibly troubled, hesitated before offering a sincere apology, clearly worried he had said something wrong. But Sang Yoon sighed, shaking his head. No, it wasn't like that. His contractor had done nothing wrong. It was just life, a life full of regrets. Still, there was one regret that weighed heavier than the rest. The person who had saved him back when he was just an orphan, that moment had shaped everything. It was the reason he had fought so hard, the reason he had held on for so long. He had spent decades trying to be like them, to be someone others could rely on. But now he was exhausted, bone deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that no amount of determination could shake off. His body was failing him. He could feel it. There would come a time, sooner rather than later, when he wouldn't be able to fight anymore. And in that moment, with a tired sigh, he finally admitted to himself, if only he were just a little younger. As Sang Yoon's constellation mulled over his words, an idea flickered to life. A small, knowing smile crossed his face as he glanced down at the book he was holding, his expression hinting at something brewing beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Sang Yoon kept talking, completely unaware. He was done. Retirement was starting to sound more and more appealing. He casually informed his constellation that he was planning to cancel their contract and suggested the celestial beings start looking for another player, someone younger, stronger, and actually capable of taking advantage of his blessings. But before he could finish his resignation speech, A strange purple aura began seeping from his constellation. Song-Yun blinked, then frowned, then stared. What was happening? His contractor had never done anything like this before. Confusion filled his face as he tried to make sense of the sudden shift. And then, the system message appeared. The late bloomer model student had utilized the very essence Song-Yun had spent decades experimenting with. Regression had begun. In a completely different place, a man known as Player G, better recognized as Park Jong-min, a dedicated reporter, was mid-interview with Han Hyun-jong, the CEO of Hyun-jong Corporation. He leaned forward, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity as he posed his next question. Dungeons and gates, he pointed out, were essentially the work environments for awakened individuals, better known as players. Han Hyun-jong nodded in agreement. Dungeons, she explained, could be considered stepping stones for players, crucial to their growth. Gates, on the other hand, were something entirely different. They connected to unknown dimensions, vast and unexplored territories that demanded bravery, skill, and sheer determination from those who dared to step through. Somewhere else, in a small room, a man sat watching the interview unfold on his television. He looked far younger than before, his face sharper, his posture lighter. That man was Song-Yun. As he absent-mindedly cleaned his battle knife, a smirk tugged at his lips. So, it really had happened. He had regressed. And now, as the familiar series played on the screen, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. It had been a long time since he had watched this. Song-Yun felt like he finally had a grasp on the situation, though the realization that 4 days had already passed since his regression weighed on him. To be precise, he had traveled back in time by 30 years. His surroundings confirmed it. This was his old studio apartment from 3 decades ago. But more importantly, his body was no longer that of a worn-out 55-year-old. He was back in his 25-year-old self, complete with all the memories of his previous life. No matter how much he tried to reason it out, there was only one possible explanation. This had to be the result of his constellation's miracle. Nothing else made sense. Spinning his battle knife between his fingers, he decided to push aside the confusion for now. Overthinking wouldn't change anything. Right now, what mattered was figuring out his next move. Maybe he should go out and get some work done. Before he could dwell on it any further, the system popped up with a notification. The weapon in his hands was identified as Venomoth's dagger, a bronze-tier artifact. A one-handed weapon classified as a dagger, boasting an attack power of 17. A simple self-defense blade, but with the added perk of never dulling. Song-Yun eyed the dagger, a smirk forming. A bronze-tier weapon at this point in time was a rare find. Its rank might be low, but he knew something others didn't. This dagger had a hidden skill. Just as Song-Yun was thinking about it, the system popped up, revealing the hidden effects of the dagger. The details were long, so rather than explaining, it simply displayed the full description for him to read on his own. He nodded to himself. Sure, the dagger's absorption rate was still low since he hadn't used it for long, but that wasn't the important part. What truly mattered was its hidden skill. And just as he thought that, the system sent another notification. Mana synchronization with Venomoth's dagger had begun. A surge of magic coursed through him, and in an instant, his appearance shifted. If anyone were watching, they might say he looked like a version 2.0 of the writer himself. Just kidding. Or maybe not. Before he could fully admire the transformation, another system message popped up, informing him that he was now entering the gap of unconsciousness. This space was the barrier he needed to cross in order to consume an artifact, and no matter how many times he experienced it, it always made him uneasy. He never knew what kind of dish was going to appear. As if on cue, something descended from the sky. A golden, perfectly roasted chicken sat elegantly on a plate, gleaming under an unseen light source. Song-Yun stared at it, utterly baffled. The system, ever helpful, provided an explanation. Preparation for absorbing Venomoth's dagger was complete, and the dish in front of him was officially called rotisserie barbecue chicken drizzled with olive oil. His shoulders relaxed as he took in the sight. A normal dish. Thank goodness. He had half expected something terrifying, like humid swamp centipede stew, to make an appearance. Song-yoon reached out, tearing off a piece of the golden chicken leg. If all artifact absorption was this delicious, he could do this every day. Without hesitation, he took a bite, savoring the flavor as he chewed. The system chimed in, announcing that the absorption of Venomoth's dagger had begun. A moment later, another notification followed. He had permanently acquired the stat, and the hidden skill Demon Bash was now his. The system also informed him that Venomoth's dagger had been fully absorbed and would now disappear forever. As he finished his meal, he sighed, feeling a small pang of regret. It was a shame the dagger was destroyed, but it wasn't like he had planned to use it anyway. More importantly, he had obtained a useful skill, just as he had intended. Stretching his arms, he decided it was time to head out. Meanwhile, at dungeon number 85, a shimmering blue portal stood tall, surrounded by a group of hunters from Team Yoondaekyung. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as they prepared for their mission. One of the team members called out, addressing their leader, Daekyung. Hearing his name, Daekyung turned to the man, one of the porter's group leaders, and raised an eyebrow, waiting for an explanation. The porter hesitated for a moment before speaking. One of the porters had dropped out. A newcomer who had joined just 4 days ago, someone named Shin Song-yoon. Daekyung barely reacted, simply waving off the concern. There was nothing to worry about. Song-yoon had already been reassigned. From now on, he wouldn't be working as a porter. He was joining the player team. The porter was taken aback by Daekyung's words, his eyes widening in surprise. He hesitated for a moment before asking again, as if he had misheard. Was Song-yoon really joining the player team instead of the porter team? Daekyung remained unfazed, his voice firm as he confirmed it once more. The final approval had already been given. With that, he turned to the porter and asked if there was a problem with his decision. The porter, now visibly agitated, raised his voice in protest. There was indeed a problem. Song-yoon had only awakened recently, and he hadn't even completed the player academy. Adding someone like him to the team was unheard of. It would throw off the balance between teams. Frustration spilling over, he continued, questioning how he was supposed to distribute the workload if a complete newcomer was suddenly placed among experienced players. Just as he was about to launch into another round of objections, Daekyung stepped forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. His presence loomed over the porter as he called his name in a low, menacing tone. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The porter stiffened as Daekyung reminded him that he had always handled everything. The party, the contribution system, the distribution of resources. There was no room for argument. Under Daekyung's cold gaze, the porter's confidence crumbled. His defiance melted away as he quickly nodded in agreement, his voice barely above a whisper. Without hesitation, he apologized for questioning Daekyung's decision. As the porter retreated to his work, Daekyung turned to one of his team members with an irritated scoff. This was exactly why giving people like the porter a chance to speak was a waste of time. They never knew when to stop, and all it did was get on his nerves. The team member, however, seemed just as perplexed as the porter had been. He hesitated for a moment before asking why Daekyung had even accepted a new member. It was unexpected, even for him. Daekyung raised an eyebrow at the question before letting out a short laugh. Was he starting to have the same doubts as the porter? Without waiting for an answer, Daekyung smirked and leaned in slightly. If someone was going to die in that dungeon, it wouldn't be him or his team. It would be the new guy, Shin Song-yoon. With a casual shrug, he added that Song-yoon just needed to act tough, get himself killed, and put an end to all the porter's complaints. That way, the team's value would remain untouched. A deep chuckle escaped him as he pointed out the obvious. Song-yoon was only level 1. He wouldn't be able to do a thing. His team member, now catching on to the plan, burst into laughter as well, admitting he hadn't expected Daekyung to set the newcomer up like that. Just as the two continued their conversation, a voice cut through their amusement. Song-yoon had arrived. With a confident stride, he greeted Daekyung and the rest of the team, introducing himself without hesitation. From that day forward, he would be working as a player. His name was Shin Song-yoon. The moment Shin Song-yoon introduced himself, every team member turned to him with intense, unwelcoming stares. Their expressions were practically burning holes into him, and for a brief moment, he wondered if they had rehearsed such synchronized hostility. He had expected some resistance, but he hadn't thought they'd be this blatant about it. At the very least, they could have tried to hide it. As he was mulling over their reactions, Daekyung suddenly stepped forward, flashing a bright, almost overly enthusiastic smile. With open arms, he welcomed Songyun, making a show of friendliness as if they were old comrades finally reunited. He even commented on how he had been half expecting Songyun to show up late on his first day as a player. His eyes, however, were scanning Songyun up and down with a hint of curiosity. Tilting his head, he finally spoke up and asked if Songyun's weapon of choice was a long sword. Songyun responded with an easy smile, confirming that it was indeed his weapon. He casually added that he had studied a lot of training videos on YouTube. Daekyung's eyebrows lifted slightly at that, and with an amused chuckle, he pointed out that long swords were among the most difficult weapons to master. Songyun, undeterred, shrugged and said he would at least try to protect himself. He told Daekyung to trust him. Daekyung let out a loud, hearty laugh in response, clapping his hands together. He praised Songyun's spirit, remarking that a man needed that kind of determination, just like himself. Daekyung then addressed the team, announcing that it was time to begin the dungeon raid and urging everyone to go wild. The team members responded with enthusiasm, fully prepared for what lay ahead. Moments later, they had all geared up, and Daekyung reminded them that once they entered the dungeon, they were to stay on standby at the entrance. As the group chatted among themselves, Daekyung's gaze lingered on Songyun. His mind was filled with disdain as he scoffed at the idea of someone learning to wield a long sword from YouTube. He thought Songyun was being absurd, completely underestimating the dangers of a dungeon. The arrogance Songyun exuded simply because he had awakened as a player was laughable, as if he had a death wish. According to the raid strategy Daekyung had carefully prepared, the orc dungeon they were about to enter was notorious for crushing overconfident rookies. It was known as the Wailing Wall for newcomers, a place that quickly humbled those who thought they were invincible. Daekyung was certain that Songyun would soon learn his place. But the moment they stepped into the dungeon, reality shattered Daekyung's expectations. Instead of struggling, Songyun single-handedly slaughtered every orc in the vicinity with effortless precision. The rest of the team stood frozen in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. Daekyung himself was at a complete loss for words, unable to process what he had just witnessed. Orcs, creatures that frequently appeared in games, novels, and fantasy movies, were well-known figures in popular culture. Because of this familiarity, hunters often held certain prejudices against them, assuming they were weak. Compared to formidable monsters like dragons, orcs were certainly inferior, stupid, brutish, and violent. This perception led many newly awakened players to recklessly charge into battle against orcs, believing them to be simple-minded opponents. However, reality told a different story. Standing at an average height of 250 centimeters and weighing around 180 kilograms, orcs possessed an overwhelming physical advantage over humans. Their sheer size and strength earned them the infamous nickname the Wall of Lament, a testament to the countless arrogant players who had underestimated them. A few moments earlier, as the hunters made their way deeper into the dungeon, carefully scanning their surroundings, one of the higher-ranked players turned to Songyun. He bluntly informed him that there would be no special treatment just because he was a newcomer, making it clear that he was on his own. From behind, the porter leader chimed in with a mocking tone, calling Songyun an arrogant fool for acting like a real player despite only recently awakening. Songyun responded by saying he would do his best, but deep down, he couldn't help but notice the hostility from the others. Not a single person among them was willing to show even the slightest kindness to a rookie like him. The higher-ranked player then spoke up again, dismissing empty words and insisting that if Songyun truly meant what he said, he should prove it through his actions. Songyun remained silent as he listened to the player's words, absorbing the condescending tone without reaction. A few seconds later, he finally spoke up, asking the player in front of him if he could take the front lines in battle should they encounter a monster. The question took the player by surprise, and he immediately scoffed, asking if Song Yoon had lost his mind. However, before he could continue mocking him, his expression suddenly shifted to one of shock. His eyes widened as he shouted a warning to the group. An orc had appeared behind them. The unexpected presence of the monster sent a wave of tension through the team, catching everyone off guard. Song Yoon, however, remained unfazed. Instead, he thought to himself that this would be his first real battle since regressing. Gripping his sword tightly, he took a step forward and calmly declared that he would handle the orc. Before he could make a move, the player in front of him reacted swiftly, raising his shield and blocking the orc's attack without hesitation. He then turned back to Song Yoon and shouted in frustration, accusing him of being reckless. He questioned how Song Yoon expected to wield a greatsword properly when he was moving so sluggishly. Despite the criticism, Song Yoon simply stated that he didn't need any help and would take care of the orc himself. The player, however, was having none of it. With an irritated glare, he snapped back, telling Song Yoon to stop talking and prove his worth through action. Song Yoon, unfazed by the player's irritation, calmly responded that he would do exactly that and suggested the player focus on the orc in front of him for now. The player, clearly annoyed, retorted that Song Yoon should be grateful for his help in this situation. However, before he could finish his sentence, the orc swung its massive axe, aiming directly for his head. Just as the attack was about to land, Daekyung stepped forward and intercepted the blow with his shield, deflecting the orc's strike. In the same motion, he counterattacked with enough force to send the orc flying backward. His sudden intervention left the player momentarily speechless. Daekyung's voice boomed across the battlefield as he scolded both Song Yoon and the player, demanding to know if they had come to the dungeon for a picnic. He reminded them to get their act together and focus on the fight. The player, embarrassed by his leader's reprimand, quickly apologized for letting his guard down. Meanwhile, the rest of the team watched in awe. Seeing Daekyung handle the orc so effortlessly left them impressed with his strength. Without wasting any time, Daekyung ordered everyone to stay back, declaring that he would finish the orc himself. As if in response, the orc let out a thunderous roar and charged at Daekyung and the rest of the players with unrelenting aggression. It launched a series of furious attacks, but Daekyung skillfully blocked each one without breaking a sweat. After a brief but intense exchange, he finally saw an opening and delivered a decisive strike, driving his weapon straight through the orc's heart. The monster let out a final gasp before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. The players watched in excitement as Daekyung's weapon pierced straight through the orc's heart. Bursting with admiration, they praised his strength and asked if the fight was over and if the orc was truly dead. However, just as the words left their mouths, the orc's eyes suddenly snapped open. A menacing smile spread across its face as it raised its massive axe and unleashed a devastating attack toward Daekyung. Reacting swiftly, Daekyung managed to dodge the blow, barely avoiding a fatal strike. As he retreated, a wave of disbelief washed over him. He had been certain his previous attack would finish the orc, yet somehow it had survived. From a distance, Song Yoon observed the fight carefully. He noted that Yoon Daekyung was supposed to be the highest level player in the group, yet he was only level 50. With that in mind, Song Yoon realized that Daekyung lacked the strength to land a critical hit on the orc. Furious at the unexpected resistance, Daekyung launched himself at the orc once more. With a powerful strike, he roared at the creature, demanding that it take his attack head-on. This time, his blow struck true, finally putting the orc down for good. As the lifeless body of the orc slumped to the ground, the players erupted into cheers. They celebrated Daekyung's victory, marveling at how he had defeated the orc entirely on his own. Even Daekyung himself seemed momentarily surprised by what he had accomplished. Quickly regaining his composure, he confidently declared that the orc was nothing compared to him. Turning to his team, he asked if everyone was all right, his voice filled with both authority and satisfaction. Daekyung's team members responded immediately, assuring him that they were unharmed and expressing their admiration for his dependability. Hearing this, Daekyung nodded and declared that they would proceed further into the dungeon. However, just as he was speaking, a deep, thunderous roar echoed through the air, sending a chill down everyone's spine. The players instinctively turned toward the source of the sound, their eyes widening in shock. Emerging from the darkness, a group of orcs advanced toward them, but these were no ordinary orcs. These were high orcs, far more powerful than the one Daekyung had barely managed to defeat. A wave of fear swept through the group as one of the players shouted in alarm, identifying the approaching enemies as high orcs. To make matters worse, some of them were armored, making them even more formidable. Panic set in as the player turned to Daekyung, desperately asking what their next move should be. Daekyung took a sharp breath as he assessed the situation. He had struggled to defeat a single orc. Facing an entire group of high orcs, some clad in armor, was far beyond what he could handle. The sheer strength radiating from them was overwhelming, and he knew that attempting to fight would only lead to disaster. Realizing that retreat was their best option, he quickly made his decision. He turned to his team and, with a firm voice, ordered them to fall back for their own safety. As Daekyung was giving the order to retreat, Songyun suddenly spoke up, asking if he could try taking down all the orcs himself. The entire team froze in disbelief at his words. One player immediately questioned what he was saying, while another, baffled by the suggestion, asked if he had lost his mind. Apologizing to Daekyung, the player added that he should have done a better job training Songyun not to spout such nonsense. Daekyung let out a frustrated sigh and told Songyun that he understood his excitement after awakening, but there was no way he could defeat the orcs alone. However, before Daekyung could finish his sentence, Songyun had already dashed forward at full speed, charging straight toward the orcs. Daekyung's eyes widened in alarm as he shouted for Songyun to stop, warning that he was going to get himself killed. But in the very next moment, Songyun swung his greatsword with a single powerful motion, slicing an orc clean in half. As the massive creature collapsed, Songyun remarked to himself that the greatsword felt satisfying to use. The other players stood frozen in shock, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. One of them stammered in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how Songyun had managed to kill a high orc with a single swing. Meanwhile, Songyun himself was analyzing his own performance, wondering if the cut could have been even cleaner. He suspected that being only level 1 might have limited the sharpness of his strike. Just as he was contemplating this, a system notification appeared before him, displaying his stats and the skills he possessed. The high orcs, enraged by the sight of one of their own being slain, wasted no time in launching a furious charge toward Songyun. However, he remained completely unfazed. Though he was still at a low level, he reminded himself that he had years of experience under his belt. Holding his greatsword forward, he unleashed a single devastating swing, cutting down multiple high orcs in one swift motion. As he continued his assault, one of the remaining high orcs attempted to strike from behind. Sensing the attack, Songyun reacted instantly, pivoting with a powerful swing that sliced the high orc clean in half. As the body collapsed, he remarked to himself that he had fought and killed many high orcs in his youth. The other players stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were witnessing. One of them turned to the group, questioning if the warrior fighting before them was truly Songyun. Another, still watching in disbelief, admitted that at this rate, Songyun might actually wipe out all of the high orcs single-handedly. And he wasn't even joking. With only one enemy left, Songyun turned his gaze to the armored orc. Unlike the others, this one stood tall, its thick plate gleaming under the dungeon's dim light. Letting out a thunderous roar, it charged forward with incredible speed. The moment it reached Songyun, it swung its massive axe with full force, aiming to crush him in a single blow. But just as the attack came crashing down, Songyun dodged effortlessly, sidestepping with precision. Without hesitation, he countered with a powerful slash of his greatsword. However, as the blade made contact, it barely managed to graze the armored orc's thick skin. Daekyung watched in shock as Song Yoon's attack barely left a mark on the armored orc. Seeing how thick its skin was, he quickly turned to the rest of the team and admitted that this was not looking good for Song Yoon. However, Song Yoon, hearing Daekyung's concern, brushed it off and told him not to be so dramatic, assuring him that there was nothing to worry about. Before he could say anything else, the armored orc wasted no time and swung its massive axe once again, this time aiming straight for Song Yoon's neck. Just as the blade was about to make contact, Song Yoon activated a skill, Demon Bash, a hidden level 1 ability designed to hinder a target, whether human or monster, for 2 full seconds. Instantly, the armored orc froze in place, its movements completely halted. Confusion flashed across the orc's face as it struggled to move, unable to comprehend what was happening. Song Yoon, wearing a menacing smile, told the creature to stay put while he ended its life. The armored orc let out a furious roar, but before it could break free, Song Yoon delivered a final, lethal strike, cutting it down in an instant. The rest of the players stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Daekyung, still in disbelief, muttered to himself, questioning how any of this was possible. A player who had only just awakened had single-handedly wiped out an entire group of high orcs. But what shocked him even more was the skill Song Yoon had used. Demon Bash was nothing more than a basic hindrance ability, yet it had lasted for a full 2 seconds. Even the highest level players Daekyung knew could only manage 1.5 seconds at most. As Daekyung struggled to process what he had just witnessed, the rest of the players chimed in, marveling at Song Yoon's skills. They pointed out that not only was he incredibly proficient with his abilities, but his mastery of the greatsword was also impressive. One of them jokingly suggested that they should ask Song Yoon what kind of YouTube videos he watched so they could learn to fight like him. Daekyung, still too stunned to respond, could only wonder where Song Yoon had acquired such extraordinary skills. At that moment, a system notification appeared before Song Yoon, congratulating him on leveling up. The system further announced that he had fulfilled the conditions for a title and had been awarded an F-rank title called Fearless Immature Puppy. Seeing the notification, Song Yoon barely paid attention to the level up, but the unexpected title caught his interest. As he processed the information, the system informed him that he had unused bonus stat points and prompted him to allocate them. Without hesitation, he made his choice, having already decided beforehand. In his previous life, he had learned the importance of this decision. Without a second thought, he invested his points into luck. He knew that the luck stat directly influenced skill hit rates and artificial drop rates, making a necessity for him at this moment. While Song Yoon was preoccupied with his thoughts, Daekyung finally spoke up, still struggling to comprehend the situation. He questioned whether the person before him was really the same Song Yoon he had known. He also asked about the skill Song Yoon had used, recognizing it as hindrance, and demanded to know where Song Yoon had obtained such an ability. Song Yoon reminded himself that he had just regressed and was finally putting his skills to good use. However, he couldn't exactly explain that to Daekyung, so he quickly came up with a lie, claiming that he had acquired the skill upon awakening. Daekyung, unconvinced, immediately called him out, saying that his explanation didn't make any sense. He pressed Song Yoon further, insisting that he stop avoiding the question. Considering the sheer power Song Yoon had just displayed, Daekyung speculated that he might have gotten lucky and obtained a diamond rank artifact, perhaps even higher. He suggested that the greatsword Song Yoon wielded could be the true source of his overwhelming strength. Before Daekyung could question him any further, Song Yoon calmly handed over the weapon and told him to check its stats himself. Taking the greatsword in his hands, Daekyung examined it closely. As he read through its attributes, he was stunned to find that it was nothing more than an ordinary greatsword with no special abilities whatsoever. The realization left him speechless. Seeing Daekyung's reaction, Song Yoon smirked and simply reminded him that he had already told him so. Grinning to himself, Daekyung couldn't help but think about how unfair life was. He had been grinding in dungeons for 2 whole years, yet even at level 50, he didn't have a skill as broken as the one Song Yoon had just casually pulled out of nowhere. At this rate, today's payout would mostly end up in Song Yoon's pockets. Before he could dwell on the injustice any further, one of the players called out to him, letting him know that the middle boss was up. Snapping out of his thoughts, Dae-kyung, despite looking a little troubled by everything that had just happened, gathered himself and told the team to get moving. Glancing at Song Yoon, he smirked. Sure, clearing out the boss minions had been stupidly easy thanks to him, but he figured it was time to bring the kid back down to earth. He warned Song Yoon not to get too cocky, reminding him that his little skill wouldn't do much against the demon orc they were about to face. But instead of looking worried, Song Yoon's eyes lit up, as if he had suddenly remembered something fun. He let out a small smile, shaking his head at himself. He had almost forgotten the whole reason he had rejoined this party after regressing. It was simple. This party paid based on performance. Without missing a beat, Song Yoon turned to Dae-kyung and asked if he took down the demon orc all by himself, could he keep both the artifact and the reward for killing it? Dae-kyung stopped in his tracks, blinking. Did this kid just say what he thought he said? Looking back on the past, the Crimson Stone was a notoriously rare artifact, only obtainable by defeating demon orcs. But even after slaying hundreds of them, most players never saw one drop. The chances of getting it were painfully low, like winning the lottery, but with way more blood and broken bones involved. In his past life, Song Yoon had never even come close to getting one. The team he was in had failed miserably against a demon orc, getting utterly wiped out. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, another team strolled in, took down the monster, and just like that, scored the Crimson Stone. Still battered and exhausted from his team's humiliating defeat, Song Yoon had overheard the victorious players talking among themselves, their voices filled with excitement. One of them cheered, congratulating their captain for obtaining the artifact and immediately asking how he managed to get so lucky. Another player chimed in, practically drooling over the payday they were about to score. If they sold the Crimson Stone on the market, they'd be rolling in cash. And then came the kicker. One of them pointed out that the Crimson Stone was one of the only artifacts that had the skill delay, making it even rarer. Song Yoon had frozen in place. Delay, the exact skill he had desperately needed at that moment. Meanwhile, their captain, clearly uncomfortable with all the attention, told his team to quit yapping. Every player in the area was practically salivating over the artifact, and he wasn't about to let them jinx it. Song Yoon could only stand there, stunned. The Crimson Stone wasn't just some valuable artifact. It was a game changer. And in his past life, it had slipped right through his fingers. Back in the present, Song Yoon had just declared that he wanted to take on the boss monster solo, and the rest of the players stood frozen in stunned silence. No objections, no arguments, just an awkward, heavy pause as they processed what they had just heard. Seeing their lack of response, Song Yoon spoke up again, reminding them that, if his memory served him right, Team Dae-kyung distributed rewards based on contribution. So, logically speaking, if he took down the boss alone, then the reward should rightfully belong to him. Simple as that. Dae-kyung just stood there, watching him, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Song Yoon was already running calculations in his head. Getting his hands on the delay skill now was crucial for future events. But he also knew that most people hated rookie players who came off as cocky, and from an outsider's perspective, he probably looked exactly like that. And sure enough, the players around him did not take his words kindly. One of them, looking downright irritated, shot him a glare and snapped, asking if he had lost his mind and who the hell he thought he was. Another scoffed and added, "Oh, so you think you're hot stuff just because you killed a few orcs?" And to top it all off, the mere mention of item distribution made their blood boil even more. Song Yoon could feel the hostility thick in the air. Yep, exactly as he predicted. As the players continued to argue against Song Yoon, Dae-kyung finally spoke up, cutting through the noise with a sharp command for everyone to calm down. Then, turning to Song Yoon, he told him that he could do as he pleased. That single statement sent a ripple of shock through the group. The players stared at their captain, baffled that he was actually allowing Song Yoon to enter the boss room alone. But before they could even process it, Dae-kyung spoke again, his tone firm. Song Yoon could go in only if Dae-kyung's team failed to take down the boss first. Only then would Song Yoon be allowed to enter and take a shot. As he laid down the condition, he shot Song Yoon a look that was anything but friendly. Song Yoon, on the other hand, was inwardly amused. That negotiation had gone way smoother than he expected. He wasted no time confirming the terms, casually stating that this meant he'd be stepping out of battle for now, while Daekyung and his team handled the boss. Daekyung barely even looked at him as he turned away, agreeing with a clipped tone that Songyun could do whatever he wanted once they were done. The other players, still stunned by Daekyung's decision, had no choice but to fall in line and follow orders. As he walked ahead, Daekyung's thoughts simmered with irritation. To him, Songyun was nothing more than a cocky bastard acting like he was untouchable just because he had one broken skill. Daekyung clenched his fists, determination flaring in his eyes. He was going to clear this dungeon and shut Songyun's mouth while he was at it. No way was he going to let some arrogant rookie act like he owned the place. With that thought fueling him, he placed his hand on the massive door. As he pushed it open, a smirk tugged at his lips. This is where I show him. Experience is what truly matters on the battlefield. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing the figure standing in the center of the dimly lit room. Immediately, a system notification popped up announcing that he had entered the room of the middle boss. Silence fell over the team. The air felt thick, oppressive, from the sheer presence of the monster before them. Then, another notification flashed. Middle boss, bloodthirsty demon orc. Daekyung exhaled sharply, shifting into his attack stance. His grip tightened around his weapon as he barked out the order for everyone to prepare for battle. Without hesitation, his team followed suit, weapons at the ready. Sizing up the monster, Daekyung felt a brief flicker of unease, but he quickly brushed it aside. Sure, the demon orc looked intimidating, but from what he had heard, it wasn't anything too difficult. The reports all said it was easier to take down than it appeared. Time to put that to the test. He called out to his team, voice steady and commanding. They were to spread out, circle the boss, and hit it from the rear. A tried-and-true strategy, one that had never failed him before. Daekyung couldn't help but find it amusing that Songyun was even considering soloing the boss. The sheer audacity. In his mind, he offered a silent apology. Not that you'll need it, because you're not even going to get the chance. He was going to finish this fight right here, right now. Fueled by confidence, he took a deep breath, then bellowed to his team that he was taking the lead. Without hesitation, the players charged forward, weapons raised, battle cries filling the room. And then, mere seconds later, Daekyung found himself sprawled on the cold dungeon floor, his head spinning. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he tried to process what had just happened. Slowly, he pushed himself up, shaking off the daze, and turned to his teammates. What just happened? Songyun, watching from the sidelines, blinked in disbelief. He had actually been a little worried for a moment, just a little, when Daekyung and his squad had charged in. They looked like they were about to pull off something impressive. But nope, that was not what happened. Instead, they had just run straight at the boss with no plan whatsoever. Songyun almost wanted to laugh. This is exactly why they failed the last time too, he thought, shaking his head. No strategy, no coordination, just blind, reckless charging. And once again, history repeated itself. The middle boss loomed over them, completely unscathed, its menacing eyes glowing with the thrill of battle. It hadn't even broken a sweat. Meanwhile, Daekyung and his team looked like they had just been run over by a truck. One of the players, panicked and desperate, reached out to help Daekyung up, his voice shaking as he asked what they were supposed to do now. At this rate, if they just stood around, they were all going to die. Daekyung, still struggling to get back on his feet, was a mess, bruised, bloodied, and completely at a loss. His mind raced. First, the high orc had been a nightmare, and now this? Where are all these ridiculously strong monsters even coming from? Regret washed over him like a tidal wave. This was why he never should have trusted those black market rumors. He exhaled sharply, then forced himself to speak. Forget it. They didn't need to beat the boss today. It wasn't worth it. He ordered the team to retreat, conceding that things just weren't going their way. Songyun, standing off to the side, barely contained his excitement. Finally, this was exactly what he had been waiting for. His lips curled into a quiet, satisfied smile. But of course, he wasn't as subtle as he thought. Daekyung, still catching his breath, glanced over and immediately did a double take. Was Songyun smiling? One of the players, already furious from the beatdown, exploded on the spot. He jabbed a finger at Songyun, practically growling. Something was seriously wrong with this guy. But there was no time to argue with Songyun now. Not when they were all battered, bruised, and barely standing. With no better option, the team swallowed their anger and turned their focus back to survival. Daekyung wasted no time barking out his orders. They were going to retreat, using the middle boss' weak peripheral vision to slip past it. The moment he said that, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the team. At least there was some good news. If the monster couldn't see them coming, they actually had a chance to escape. But before making a run for it, Daekyung turned his gaze towards Songyun, giving him one last look. That was his problem now. Daekyung reminded Songyun that he had warned him, so he better not hold a grudge when he ended up dead. Songyun's response? A confident, almost cocky smile. With a calm voice, he told Daekyung not to worry about him in the slightest. Then, gripping his greatsword tightly, he added with unwavering certainty, he wasn't dying today. And right on cue, the middle boss let out a thunderous roar and charged at him, its massive axe swinging down with terrifying force. Songyun barely had a moment to react, but he didn't panic. He knew that if this fight came down to raw stats alone, he wouldn't stand a chance. If they just compared numbers, the demon orc would crush him without even trying. But stats weren't everything. Experience, that was what made the difference. As the two clashed, steel met steel in a violent collision, sending a shockwave through the air. A deafening clang echoed through the room, the sheer impact rattling their weapons. And in that moment, the demon orc's eyes widened in disbelief. Songyun had blocked its attack. It wasn't just the demon orc that was stunned. The rest of the players, who had fully expected to watch him get obliterated, stood frozen in shock. One of the players blinked in confusion before turning to the others. Did they just hear that? That unmistakable metallic clank? Daekyung, still reeling from the sight, finally found his voice. He had seen it. Songyun had actually managed to deflect the orc's axe. Meanwhile, Songyun, ever the showman, casually shook out his hand and let out a playful complaint. His palm stung a little from the impact. Nothing serious. Just a minor inconvenience, really. The demon orc, on the other hand, stood frozen, its crimson eyes locked on his Songyun, scanning him carefully. It wasn't used to this. Its attacks weren't supposed to be brushed off like that. And as the monster hesitated, Songyun couldn't help but grin. It had been a while since he had been this close to getting his hands on the Crimson Stone. His obsession with it wasn't just about rarity, it was all about what it could do. The delay skill. If he could combine it with his own Demon Bash skill, the potential was terrifying. Right now, Demon Bash only stunned enemies for 2 seconds. Not bad. Pretty useful, actually. But with Devour artifacts, his ability to fuse skill effect together, he had come up with a brilliant idea. What if he could stack the stun? An infinite stun loop. His enemies would never even get the chance to move. And if he could just get his hands on the delay skill, that idea could become a reality. With that thought lighting a fire in his eyes, Songyun raised his greatsword and took a step forward. His gaze locked onto the demon orc, and he tilted his head, mock curiosity dripping from his voice as he addressed the beast. What was wrong? Why wasn't it moving? Then, with a smirk, he lifted his sword in a taunting gesture. Come on, show him what it could do. The demon orc let out a thunderous roar, its fury ignited by Songyun's taunts. Without hesitation, it charged straight at him, the ground trembling beneath its massive frame. Songyun, unfazed, simply smiled, a confident, almost amused grin. This was perfect, exactly what he wanted. A reckless enemy was an easy enemy. The more wildly the demon orc attacked, the easier it would be to find its openings. With that thought, Songyun surged forward, meeting the beast head-on. His greatsword sliced through the air, slamming into the demon orc with immense force. The impact was devastating. The massive creature staggered, its grip loosening, and with a heavy thud, its weapon fell from its hands. At that moment, the system notification popped up, confirming what Songyun already knew. Demon Bash, Level 1, had successfully activated. The orc was stunned for 2 seconds. Daekyung, watching from the sidelines, could only stare in disbelief. He had no idea Songyun's skill worked on a middle boss. That was ridiculous. Completely broken. Songyun, reveling in his advantage, chuckled to himself. He had always known orcs were simple creatures, but he hadn't expected this much. Even a demon orc, supposedly far stronger than the regular ones, had fallen for the exact same trick. But just as he was savoring his moment of victory, the demon orc moved. Faster than expected, it launched a ferocious attack, swinging at Songyun with terrifying force. Caught off guard, Songyun barely managed to react in time. His greatsword clashed against the incoming blow, the impact rattling his arms. He had blocked it, but just barely. Songyun held his ground, his grip tightening around his greatsword as he met the demon orc's relentless attacks. His eyes narrowed, locking onto the beast as a realization struck him. He had completely forgotten. The demon orc had self-regeneration. Right on cue, the system notification flashed before him, confirming his mistake. The demon orc's ability had lifted the stun effect early. That meant he couldn't use Demon Bash again for another 15 seconds. His mind raced. If he couldn't stun the demon orc, then there was only one other option. He would just have to defeat it outright. Without hesitation, the demon orc charged once more, swinging its weapon with brutal force. Songyun met the attack head-on, parrying the strike with practiced ease. The battle intensified, their weapons clashing repeatedly, each strike sending shockwaves through the air. From a distance, Daekyung and the others watched in silence. Their eyes remained fixed on the fight, tension hanging thick in the air. One of the players broke the silence, nudging Daekyung. They needed to leave. If even Songyun's stun skill wasn't working, then there was no point in sticking around. But Daekyung barely heard him. A single thought echoed in his mind. Why? Why was Songyun still standing? Why was he still smiling? The stun had failed. The gap in their stats was massive. By all logic, he should be struggling. Yet there he was, brimming with confidence, not a trace of fear or stress on his face. Was this really the same newbie he had dismissed? Songyun took a deep breath, steadying his stance as he locked eyes with the demon orc. It was time to bring this fight to an end. With a smirk, he had just his grip on his greatsword and spoke with unwavering confidence. He had been in situations like this before, overwhelmed, outmatched, but never outplayed. If he was too weak to overpower his opponent, then he just had to focus everything on a single point. Forget about cutting the enemy down with brute force. He would use its strength against it and strike where it hurt the most. The demon orc roared, launching itself forward with full force, ready to deliver its final, earth-shattering blow. But Songyun was faster. He shifted his weight at the last second, using the beast's momentum against it. With a perfectly timed thrust, his greatsword pierced clean through its chest, straight into its heart. A system notification immediately popped up, congratulating him on defeating the middle boss, the demon orc. His vision flickered for a moment as another message appeared. He had leveled up. And not just that. He had earned a new title, E-rank Demon Hunter. The demon orc's lifeless body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Another notification followed, detailing the perks of his newfound title. Facing a middle boss or anything stronger would now grant him a 5-fold increase in health regeneration. Songyun took a moment to process the information before letting out a small chuckle. 3 titles already. This was the kind of advantage that came with being a solo player. As Songyun mulled over his thoughts, Daekyung and the rest of the players stood off to the side, their faces frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. Songyun took one look at their stunned expressions and quickly realized that he didn't want them prying into his abilities. He had no interest in dealing with the kind of attention that would come from revealing too much. If he wanted to avoid any unnecessary trouble, there was only one way to handle this. Without missing a beat, he let out an exhausted sigh, feigning struggle as he wiped imaginary sweat from his brow. Acting as if the fight had nearly cost him his life, he groaned about how he had barely made it through. Then, without hesitation, he threw in a carefully placed remark. If it weren't for Daekyung weakening the demon orc beforehand, there was no way he would have been able to win on his own. One of the players perked up at that, nodding as if everything suddenly made sense. He turned to Daekyung, praising him for setting the stage for Songyun's victory. Then, with genuine curiosity, he asked when exactly Daekyung had managed to land a hit on the demon orc. Daekyung, however, was utterly baffled. He hadn't even managed to scratch the monster, let alone weaken it. For a moment, he was lost in confusion, trying to make sense of Songyun's words. But then, as he met Songyun's gaze, everything clicked. Songyun had done it on purpose. He was throwing Daekyung a lifeline, an opportunity to save face, to preserve his dignity in front of his team. If Daekyung played along, he wouldn't be remembered as the leader who failed to land a single hit, but rather as someone who had contributed to the fight. Songyun, glancing at Daekyung with a knowing look, wondered if the team leader had caught on. Daekyung, in turn, found himself hesitating for only a moment before nodding in understanding. Daekyung let out a small smile, fully grasping what Songyun was silently telling him. If he kept his promise, that all the rewards from the demon orc would go to Songyun, then Songyun would keep quiet about the truth of the battle. Not only that, but he would also allow Daekyung to take credit for the victory. Realizing this, Daekyung whispered to himself, acknowledging his complete defeat in this unspoken exchange. With that understanding, he quickly shifted his expression, turning back to his team with newfound confidence. Wasting no time, he commanded everyone to focus, declaring that with the middle boss now defeated, it was time to prepare for the final boss. His words were met with a unified response, the team rallying together as they moved forward with renewed determination. As they made their way toward their next challenge, the players fell into conversation, their chatter filled with speculation and opinions. One of them scoffed, insisting that he knew all along. There was no way a kid like Songyun could have taken down the demon orc on his own. Another player, however, admitted that he wished he had a stun skill like Songyun, to which someone immediately dismissed the idea, pointing out that the skill was practically useless if it didn't even work on a middle boss. Songyun, watching as the group moved on, turned his attention back to what truly mattered. His gaze landed on the rewards left behind by the demon orc, and there it was, the very prize he had been longing for. The Crimson Stone. A satisfied smile spread across his face as he reached for it, his excitement barely contained. It was finally time to consume the Crimson Stone. As Songyun reached for the Crimson Stone, the system immediately popped up, displaying its details. It was a silver artifact, and its special effect was none other than delay. Just as he processed the information, everything around him blurred, and in the next moment, he found himself drifting into the strange space between consciousness and unconsciousness. There, in a state of slight confusion, he noticed something unexpected, the system presenting him with a dish. Bibim Naengmyeon with meat jelly. A classic. His eyes lit up as he happily took the bowl, muttering to himself, wondering if things were really going to play out this way. But resistance was futile. There was no way he could refuse a combination like this. As he took his first bite, the system chimed in once more, notifying him that the absorption of the Crimson Stone had begun. Bite after bite, the process continued, and with each mouthful, the system updated him. Due to the silver rank's 20% base stat absorption rate, his strength and health had each increased by 2. Finally, as he finished the last bit of food, the system confirmed that the absorption was complete. The Crimson Stone's special effect, delay, had now been added to his arsenal. A surge of excitement ran through him. But as he took it all in, an unexpected feeling crept up. Nervousness. He couldn't help but ask himself why he was feeling this way. Before he could dwell on it, the system delivered the final piece of information. The delay effect had successfully merged with Demon Bash. Now, if he activated Demon Bash again before the initial stun wore off, he could guarantee an extension into a second stun state. An infinite stun loop. A slow grin spread across Songyun's face. This was exactly what he had been aiming for. The system further informed Songyun that the third consecutive stun had a 90% chance of activation. The fourth had a 60% chance, and the fifth had a 30% chance of extending the stun state. Songyun was taken aback by the sheer potential of the skill. He had only theorized that chaining multiple stuns might be possible, but he never expected the probability to be this high. As he examined his newly enhanced abilities, a voice suddenly called out to him. It was Daekyung. Approaching him, Daekyung asked if they could talk. Songyun, still absorbed in his thoughts, turned to him and asked what the conversation was about. Daekyung wasted no time and explained that they were now standing right in front of the final boss room, where the Orc Berserker awaited. Songyun, processing the information, assumed that Daekyung wanted him to join in later, once the fight was nearing its end. However, to his surprise, Daekyung immediately denied that assumption. Songyun raised an eyebrow, slightly caught off guard by the response. With a confident smile, Daekyung continued, stating that as a leader, he would be failing his role if he did not properly utilize a teammate like Songyun. Then, without hesitation, Daekyung extended his hand toward him, proposing that they work together to defeat the boss monster. Songyun clasped Daekyung's hand firmly, a confident smile forming on his face. He agreed to work together, but made it clear that his conditions remained unchanged. If he was the one to defeat the monster, the rewards would belong to him. Daekyung, without hesitation, acknowledged the terms and gave his agreement. Just then, one of the players approached them, informing Daekyung that the team was ready to enter the boss room. Daekyung nodded and announced that it was time to move forward. He addressed the team, instructing everyone to stay alert. However, as he spoke, Sungyun caught sight of one of the players who had just joined them, glaring at him with cold disdain. The look was sharp and filled with hostility, but Sungyun remained composed, making a mental note of it. Daekyung continued, attempting to lighten the mood by suggesting that after clearing the dungeon, they should all go grab some drinks. While the others seemed encouraged by the remark, Sungyun's focus remained on the player who had given him that hostile glare. Moments later, they arrived at the final boss room. Sitting in the center of the chamber was a massive orc radiating an intense red aura, its low growls reverberating throughout the space. The name hovering above its head identified it as the Orc Berserker. As the players stood in silence, observing the boss dungeon, Daekyung finally spoke, announcing that he would take the lead in attacking the boss. However, before he could move, Sungyun stepped forward, gripping his greatsword with determination. Without hesitation, he told Daekyung to stay close and follow his lead. Daekyung was taken aback by Sungyun's words, surprised by his confidence. He quickly responded, insisting that this time, Sungyun should not face the boss alone. He emphasized that everyone needed to work together, as the boss was far stronger than the orcs they had previously encountered. Despite Daekyung's concerns, Sungyun remained calm, thinking to himself that the Orc Berserker actually had lower skill resistance than the Demon Orc. If he stayed composed and executed his attacks carefully, stunning the boss would be much easier. With that in mind, he was certain he would have no trouble handling the battle. Right at that moment, as Sungyun was deep in thought, the Orc Berserker wasted no time and charged straight at him. But Sungyun, seeing the hulking brute coming at him, couldn't help but think to himself, I can't believe I just told Daekyung to stick with me. He paused for a second, wondering when he had gained the kind of confidence to say something like that. His mind flashed back to when he was younger, always scared and uncertain. Back then, he spent more time begging other players to let him join their teams than actually fighting. And most of the time, they turned him down because his level was too low. What a joke, Sungyun thought, remembering those days. But now, as he stood there facing the Orc Berserker, he felt a shift. He was done with that life, the life of the scared, the overlooked, the one who always had to beg for a place. He told himself right there and then that he wasn't going to live that way anymore. No more running, no more hiding. He was going to change his past, and more importantly, change his future to be something better, something that worked in his favor. With that determination in mind, Sungyun blocked the Berserker's attack with a confident grin. And just as quickly, he countered, thinking to himself, if I want to prove I'm no longer the weakling I once was, if I want a future that's mine to shape, I need to show them all, right here, right now, that my strength is real. Daekyung, watching from the sidelines, couldn't believe his eyes. Not only was Sungyun standing tall against the Orc Berserker, but he was actually taking the upper hand in the fight. This guy's a monster, Daekyung thought, completely awestruck by how effortlessly Sungyun was handling the beast. In that moment, Sungyun activated his skill, Demon Bash, a move that not only hit hard but also stunned the Orc Berserker. For a brief moment, the Berserker froze, unable to move, and Sungyun saw his chance. Without missing a beat, he yelled to the other players, warning them that the Orc Berserker would be stunned for 4 seconds. He urged them to make the most of it, telling them to hit the orc with everything they had. Hearing Sungyun shout, the rest of the players charged in with renewed confidence, eager to take advantage of the brief window of opportunity. In those 4 seconds, though it might have seemed like nothing, it was everything in the heat of battle. And in those precious seconds, Sungyun and the others unleashed a flurry of attacks on the Orc Berserker, each blow bringing them closer to victory. When the Berserker finally fell, the system chimed in, congratulating everyone for defeating the final boss and clearing the altar of the Crimson Orc. As the announcement echoed through the battlefield, one of the players couldn't hold back, speaking up with a grin. He remarked that the dungeon had felt almost too easy, adding that he hadn't even needed to use a single potion from the start. Another player chimed in, nodding with appreciation. He pointed out that it was all thanks to Sungyun's stun skill that the fight had gone so smoothly. Without that, they might still be fighting the Berserker. As the players were chatting amongst themselves, the leader of the porters suddenly spoke up, asking the other porter if Sungyun already had a personal porter. He casually wondered aloud if he should ask Sungyun about it. The other porter, hearing this, grinned and replied that had been planning to be the first to bring it up. But the leader, not missing a beat, shrugged and said it didn't matter because, after all, he had to make a living too. Sungyun, overhearing their banter, couldn't help but smirk. People really change fast, he thought. And in that moment, he also added, "I'm not doing anything for them, not even a little bit." Just then, the system chimed again, and Song Yoon's attention shifted. It informed him that he had leveled up once more and, as a bonus, had earned the D rank title with overwhelming power. His status effects would now last 10% longer. Song Yoon couldn't help but chuckle to himself. "Feels like I'm collecting titles like candy today," he mused. "Never got titles in my previous life." But then, as he processed the latest achievement, his expression shifted. Even with all these titles, it's nothing compared to him, Song Yoon thought, remembering the name Do Gyung-soo, aka Ghostblade. In his past life, Do Gyung-soo had earned countless titles, and not just any titles. He was the strongest swordsman player in Korea. The guy was a beast, having surpassed level 500 just 2 years after the Age of Players began. Song Yoon, now wearing a more determined expression, thought to himself, "Back then, I just looked up to Do Gyung-soo. But now, there's no reason I can't catch up to him." With newfound resolve, he knew that this time, he wouldn't be left in anyone's shadow. Song Yoon, lost in his thoughts, couldn't help but think that if he really stepped up the gas from now on, he might actually have a chance of catching up to Do Gyung-soo, or maybe even surpassing him. He felt a flicker of excitement at the possibility. Just as he was getting lost in his plans, Dae-kyung spoke up, noticing that Song Yoon was acting a little off. "What's up with you?" he asked. Song Yoon, caught off guard, blinked and immediately responded, "Oh, I was just stretching." Dae-kyung raised an eyebrow, but decided to change the subject. He told Song Yoon to take the item the Orc Berserker had dropped after they defeated it. Song Yoon froze for a moment. "Wait, Dae-kyung's actually offering me the item?" He blinked, then asked, "What's gotten into you?" Dae-kyung smiled, clearly in a good mood. He shrugged and said, "You really carried us this time in the dungeon. Plus, I've got a sense of morality. I can't scam you out of the hard work you put in." He paused for a moment, then added, "It's just a bronze rank item anyway. I can afford to be generous." Song Yoon, still a little surprised, gave a small, awkward smile. "You're a little too honest, you know that?" Dae-kyung chuckled and jokingly replied, "I wouldn't have given it to you if it was expensive, trust me." Then his tone shifted just slightly, a little bittersweet as he continued, "Besides, it's not like we'll be seeing each other much after this anyway." Song Yoon raised an eyebrow at that, but Dae-kyung was already thinking to himself. It hurt to say it, but Dae-kyung knew it was the truth. Song Yoon was already living in a world that was far beyond where he and the other players were, and that gap was growing wider by the day. As Song Yoon and Dae-kyung continued chatting, one of the players, a blonde-haired guy who had been glaring at Song Yoon with barely concealed hatred, watched them from the corner of his eye. The player's thoughts simmered with frustration. So Dae-kyung's all buddy-buddy with Song Yoon just because the guy showed off his skills a couple of times? He clenched his fists, feeling the unfairness of it all. After all, this was the same Dae-kyung he had been trying to impress for so long, just to get on his good side. And now here was Song Yoon getting all this attention. Unable to contain his anger any longer, the player pulled out his cell phone and muttered under his breath, "You two should just die together." As he said this, he called someone who could help make that happen. A few moments later, after the dungeon run was done, Song Yoon was back at his own house, grinning from ear to ear. "This is exactly why I became a player," he thought, as he looked at the huge pile of cash he'd earned from completing the dungeon. Porters usually only made about $200 a day, but Dae-kyung had given him more than double that, plus a little extra bonus on top. "Now that's what I'm talking about," he thought, feeling pretty pleased with himself. His gaze then shifted to the item Dae-kyung had handed him. The name of the artifact was Berserker Ring, a bronze-level item that promised to increase his strength by 10. The ring also had a special effect, drawing out the wearer's blood rage. Song Yoon couldn't help but grin. Even if it's just a bronze item, he thought, I'm not going to complain about getting an artifact with this kind of power for free. And hey, it's got that lighten effect too. Not bad at all. As Song Yoon read the details of the lighten effect, he couldn't help but smirk. It drained 1 mana every second to reduce the weight of all equipped artifacts to 1 gram, which was why the ring was bronze rank. Most players would run out of mana before even swinging their sword, but for Song Yoon, it was a different story. After 50 years of studying his abilities, he knew exactly how to work with mana-draining artifacts. In his past life, he had consumed such an artifact, and the results were incredible. The penalty for using mana-based artifacts was eliminated when consumed, making them perfect for him. With a grin, he activated his mana synchronization skill with the Berserker Ring. The more skills, the better, he thought, not bothered by the penalty. Meanwhile, in a private club in Gangnam, Seoul, the blonde-haired player was grumbling to another player about Song Yoon's 4-second stun. But before he could go further, a man nearby coldly asked if the player was raising his voice against him. The player froze, immediately apologizing as fear flashed across his face. The man casually brushed it off and then asked, "Do you want me to take revenge for you?" The player quickly clarified, No. I'm just saying, Songyun's loaded. He's definitely using some stun artifact, and Daekyung seems to favor him a lot." The man, now growing irritated, asked sharply, "So what exactly do you want me to do?" The player stammered, "It's business, really. I think we can use this to our advantage." As the player continued to babble, one of the women in the club whispered to her companion, rolling her eyes. She muttered that the player looked like a complete loser, especially since the man wasn't even close to the player's level. She wondered aloud why the man was even listening to him. Hearing this, the man shot a cold glance at the player and, without a word, grabbed a knife. In an instant, he cut off the player's ear. The player screamed in agony, clutching his bleeding ear. With a sinister smile, the man stood up and taunted the player. "Who do you think you are?" he asked, his voice dripping with menace. "You're our personal servant now." Then, without hesitation, he grabbed a glass of wine and splashed it all over the player's freshly severed ear, the red liquid mixing with the blood. The man's smile grew wider as he leaned in, his voice low and threatening. "You'll pay the price now, and I'll listen to every word you have to say as long as your ear is worth." The man's gaze hardened, and he sneered. "Now tell me, where's that player, Songyun, you've been blabbering about?" In the outskirts of the city, at the Jamshil 4-3 training ground, a lone figure wandered across the open field, a massive sword strapped to his back. Songyun walked with purpose, or at least he tried to, until his stomach twisted in protest. Groaning, Songyun dropped onto the nearest patch of ground, clutching his stomach like it had personally betrayed him. Yeah, he really should have known better than to trust that cold cucumber soup. Eastern style, they said. Legendary, they said. Deadly, they did not say. And yet, here Songyun was suffering the consequences of what should have been a simple meal. Just as Songyun was about to wallow in his misery, he caught sight of the sword resting against his shoulder. A troubled frown turned into a contemplative look, and then, as if convincing himself of something, Songyun nodded. There was always light at the end of a dark tunnel. Or, in this case, maybe a really cool sword at the end of a terrible meal. With renewed determination, Songyun gripped the hilt and tossed the sword into the air, letting the weight carry it into a rapid spin. Round and round it went, slicing through the air effortlessly, until snap, his fingers closed around it again, halting its movement in an instant. Odd. For a sword that looked like it could crush a boulder, it felt almost light, as if answering his unspoken thoughts. A translucent screen materialized before Songyun. The system had something to say. Weapon name, lightweight. Special effect, always active. Cooldown none. But there was more. Thanks to the Devour artifact skill, the old mana consumption requirement had been erased. In exchange, the effect of lightweight had been halved. Still, that hardly seemed like a problem, because, according to the system, every artifact Songyun wielded would now weigh a grand total of 100 grams. Songyun blinked at the message, then at the massive blade in his hands. Well, that explained why it felt so absurdly light. Songyun gave it another experimental swing, grinning despite himself. Yeah, he could definitely work with this. But then, a sudden thought struck Songyun. What if he let go of the sword entirely? Would it still feel weightless? Or would it drop like a stone and leave him scrambling to lift it again? Songyun glanced at his stats, feeling a bit more accomplished but also exhausted. He noticed a column labeled Constellation and, finding it empty, thought to himself that it was time to catch the eye of some constellation. After all, players could only have one, so he'd need to be picky. His best stat was luck, so he figured he'd aim for one that aligned with that. But for now, he realized he wasn't quite ready to get anyone's attention. He sighed, stood up, and decided the best thing to do for now was to train until he could get closer to grabbing a constellation's interest. 3 days later, Songyun stumbled out of his car, looking like he'd just survived a war. He muttered to himself that he seriously thought he might die after 3 days of nonstop training and long-distance driving. He chuckled weakly, admitting to himself that he might have gone a bit overboard. But hey, he got a new skill out of it, so at least it wasn't all for nothing. As if on cue, the system popped up, showing Songyun the shiny new skill he had acquired, ambidextrous sword training. It was a passive skill, and the system explained that it would boost his adaptability with all swords, excluding daggers and one-handed longswords. Songyun grinned, feeling a little less tired now. Songyun stood in front of a solo player exclusive dungeon, grinning to himself. He chuckled, thinking about how it would have taken him months of waiting in line just to get a shot at this place. But today, he could just drive right up. Lucky him. But as he was about to head inside, something caught his eye. A black car parked by the side of the road, blending into the scenery. Sang-yoon's eyes narrowed as he realized who it probably was. So they've been following me through the forest? He muttered to himself. He didn't know what they wanted, but he wasn't too worried about it. Whatever they had planned, they could sort it out in the dungeon. With that thought, he walked inside. And not long after, the group that had been tailing him followed suit, stepping through the dungeon gates. As they emerged, one of them looked around, clearly trying to figure out where they were. That's when Sang-yoon's voice rang out, a smirk playing on his lips. He told them this dungeon was for solo players only, and that they had no business being there. He wasn't about to let anyone step on his turf. One of the four shot back, calling Sang-yoon an idiot for saying such a thing. Sang-yoon took a moment to assess them. They didn't look like ordinary players, so he had just his stance. With a cold grin, he told them that if they just left quietly, he wouldn't bother reporting them to the higher-ups. Sang-yoon sized up the four in front of him, his mind working quickly. They didn't have a healer or mage. Clearly, they had discarded sustainability, something that was crucial for clearing a dungeon. Instead, they had gone for a party of all swordsmen and one archer. Definitely not a team built for endurance, but more for hunting down targets like humans. He remembered their reputation. These were the infamous hyena pack. One of the players sneered at him, telling Sang-yoon not to think he was all that great. Another player joined in, calling him an idiot and threatening that if Sang-yoon died here, they wouldn't even bother recovering his body. Sang-yoon couldn't help but smirk at that. Had dealt with the hyena pack before. In the past, they'd been wiped out by the Player Association's constant surveillance, but it had been a while since Head run into them. Sang-yoon raised an eyebrow and casually responded that he was fully aware of what they were saying. But as he did, he thought to himself that, with a party like this, the archer would be the real trouble. Just as he predicted, the archer spoke up, urging the team to hurry up and finish things. Sang-yoon grinned, clearly enjoying himself. He told them that this was exactly why Head had been waiting for them. If he needed to dispose of four bodies, what better place than a dungeon? One of the players, clearly furious with Sang-yoon's cocky attitude, stepped forward to attack. But before he could make a move, another player grabbed him, halting his advance. The one who spoke up was Sang-go, and he declared they were going to take the easy route. Sang-yoon couldn't resist a little taunt. He shot a glance at Sang-go and told him to be a good boy and listen to his boss. Then, with a mocking smile, he added that they shouldn't waste his time and should just come at him all at once. Sang-ho's patience snapped at Sang-yoon's taunt. His face twisted in anger, and he shouted for Sang-yoon to shut his mouth before charging forward with his sword drawn. As Sang-go lunged at him, Sang-yoon couldn't help but think about his saying, survival of the fittest. What better phrase could describe life in the dungeon? Monsters constantly hunted players, and buried within those dungeons were the artifacts everyone fought for. With danger lurking around every corner, one's life was always on the line. Weakness led to death, and inside a dungeon, there were no rules or laws. Kill or be killed. It was that simple. Sang-yoon had learned this lesson well in his past life, and it still applied here. Everything that happened now, it was just self-defense. In the next moment, Sang-yoon stood still, his face serious, the blood of his opponent staining his sword. Sang-go had charged at him, only to end up sliced cleanly in half. He looked at the remaining three, unfazed, and taunted them. What were they waiting for? He dared them to come at him. The other three hesitated for a split second, but then they moved. They began to circle around Sang-yoon, attempting to trap him. Juntae, their apparent leader, called out to the others. He told them to keep their distance from Sang-yoon and directed the archer to cover the two swordsmen while they got into position. Sang-yoon couldn't help but grin. Things were getting interesting. The archer, retreating a bit further, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Sang-yoon had taken down Sang-go in a single strike. Sure, Sang-go might have been an idiot, but he was level 100, while Sang-yoon had only just awakened. As the archer mulled over this, Sang-yoon suddenly spun his great sword around in a wide arc and, with a smirk, asked the archer where he thought he was going. The archer, flustered, called Sang-yoon a monster and shot an arrow straight at him. But Sang-yoon wasn't impressed. He sliced right through the arrow with ease, then, without missing a beat, hurled his great sword at the archer. The blade pierced the archer's body, and, just like that, he was done. Juntae, still processing the bizarre fight, was caught off guard. He had never seen anyone fight like that before. One of the other players, equally stunned, asked who this crazy person they were up against even was. Juntae, however, was quick to recover and thought to himself that Song-yoon must be vulnerable now. Had thrown his weapon, meaning he couldn't possibly block their attack. It was the perfect opportunity to strike. June wasted no time. He called out to his teammate, telling him that this was their chance, and the two charged toward Song-yoon. Meanwhile, Song-yoon was running toward the body of the archer, where his great sword was lodged. As he sprinted, he thought to himself, maybe he had gotten a little too excited and tossed his weapon away too soon. Well, no time to regret it now. Head deal with whatever came next. As Song-yoon grabbed his sword from the archer's body, the two remaining attackers closed in, roaring as they charged at him, demanding his death. But much to their surprise, Song-yoon dodged their strikes effortlessly, not a hint of worry in his eyes. He pulled his great sword free, and in that moment, Jun-tae, realizing what was coming, grabbed his teammate by the head. His teammate, clearly confused, asked what the heck he was doing, but before he could protest further, Jun-tae used him as a human shield to block Song-yoon's incoming attack. Needless to say, it didn't work out too well for the teammate. He was dead on the spot. Song-yoon stepped back a little, his sword dripping with blood, then looked at Jun-tae with a smirk. He casually told Jun-tae that after thinking about it, he was pretty sure Jun-tae and his crew were organ dealers. Hunta's eyes widened in surprise. Seems Song-yoon had figured it out. Song-yoon shrugged, adding that there was no way this group was working under some trust-based ideal. He was betting that Hunta's real goal was using organ transplants to awaken mana stones. He raised an eyebrow and asked Jun-tae if he was right. Song-yoon, with a knowing look, told Jun-tae that he might not seem like it, but had seen his fair share of things in the past. Jun-tae, however, just smirked and charged at Song-yoon, brushing off the comment. But before he could reach him, Song-yoon casually said he was just asking and activated his demon bash skill. In the blink of an eye, Jun-tae was frozen in place, completely stunned for 4.4 seconds. Panicking, Jun-tae couldn't figure out why he couldn't move. As his mind raced, he remembered the cut Song-yoon had landed on his hand earlier and realized that's when the skill must have triggered. He couldn't believe it. Such a broken skill existed? Really? Song-yoon, looking almost bored, told Jun-tae that the fight was over. Jun-tae, now freaking out, shouted in disbelief, questioning what Song-yoon meant. His panic grew as the realization hit him. He was going to die like this. His entire life had been the predator, hunting weaker players, but now he was the prey. Song-yoon, enjoying the moment, added that had made countless people feel the fear Jun-tae was experiencing now. With a smirk, he asked if Jun-tae was finally scared. Without waiting for an answer, he ended Hunta's life, putting an end to the man who had once been the hunter. A few moments later, Song-yoon was standing by a stream, washing his great sword, which was now coated in blood. As he scrubbed, he muttered to himself that he really shouldn't be getting used to situations like this. After all, it hadn't been that long since had regressed. Shaking his head, he shifted the topic in his mind and admitted that because of this little incident, there was no way he could become a constellation now. But hey, it was all self-defense, right? With that, he decided to push the matter aside for later, figuring he'd deal with it in time. His eyes then wandered to the scattered weapons on the ground, and just as he was about to move, the system chimed in, announcing that Song-yoon had obtained 8 artifacts from the dungeon. He smirked to himself, thinking that those artifacts were all his now. Talk about a nice haul. After grabbing his coat and putting it on, the system popped up again, showing his updated player information. Level 10. His level had shot up, and his stats had received quite the boost too. Seeing the increase, Song-yoon let out a small chuckle. Head wished he could have avoided the mess with the 4 players earlier, but well, he couldn't help it. Considering the results, it had definitely been worth it. He also joked to himself that at least he didn't get fat from eating artifacts. Looking over his stats, he couldn't help but feel impressed. Just from these gains, he was already as strong as player's hood reached level 50. He tilted his head, wondering just how long it had been since his regression. His growth rate was insane. If he kept this up, he might just break some records. Song-yoon reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver recovery ring, an artifact with a healing effect. He then mentioned the first player he had killed in the dungeon, Sungo, and noted he hadn't expected Sungo to have a status abnormality removal artifact. Thinking it over, Song-yoon realized that relying only on his stun could have been dangerous and reminded himself not to be overconfident. He examined the ring as the system began mana synchronization. Moments later, in dungeon number 101 on the internal access road, a group of goblins wandered around until one stopped and saw a player with a great sword ready to strike, Song-yoon. He wore a blindfold and took a deep breath, thinking that the requirement to earn the Lucky Day title was to kill 500 monsters with eyes closed, which was why his eyes were covered. The goblin monsters stared at Songyun, confused by what he was doing, while Songyun wondered where they would attack from. As he thought that, the goblins grinned menacingly, eager to kill him. However, Songyun sensed their presence and reminded himself to feel the airflow and listen closely. He focused, determined to maintain that state, and his hair began to turn white. He could feel every monster's movement and told himself he could handle this challenge. The goblins charged all at once, but Songyun countered with a single powerful swing, taking down most of them. He smiled, satisfied with his success, but just then an arrow flew toward him. Songyun sensed it, caught it mid-air, and told himself he had figured out the technique and got the hang of it. Songyun broke the arrow in half, surprising the goblin that had shot it. He told himself that although he had been in a tough situation recently, it helped him reflect on the past and sharpen his senses. He pointed his great sword at the remaining monsters and taunted them to attack. The goblins, enraged, charged at him, but Songyun easily defeated them. One goblin, watching in fear, realized it was in serious trouble. Moments later, after finishing the rest, a series of messages appeared, informing Songyun that he had leveled up and earned the D-rank Lucky Day title. The system explained the title's effect. Each time he defeated the same type of monster, his luck stat would increase by 0.1 up to a maximum of 10. Songyun, pleased with the result, told himself he was slowly collecting the titles he needed. Meanwhile, a group of goblins watched from afar, shocked by the sight of their fallen allies. As they stared, Songyun appeared before them with a menacing smile and told them he would use this chance to gain more stats, terrifying the goblins. Moments later, after killing most of the nearby monsters, Songyun laughed out loud, enjoying the moment. He told himself that his luck stat had increased by 30 thanks to the new title and added that it was better than most platinum rank titles. With excitement, Songyun shouted that it could be worth 500 million or even a billion. As he celebrated and dreamed of finally affording a house, the system alerted him that his surroundings were growing faint and a red spark began to appear. Surprised, Songyun realized what he had hoped for was happening sooner than expected. The system then informed him that 3 constellations had arrived. The cleaner of a fallen dimension asked if Songyun was interested in spreading misfortune. The pilgrim of grand space was intrigued by his mystery and requested a conversation, and the goddess of luck smiled as she reached out her hand. Songyun, surprised by how quickly they noticed him, reflected on the fact that 3 constellations had appeared. He then asked them about the little show he had put on, but as he spoke, the goddess of luck approached, making him panic and wonder if he had been too cocky. Songyun admitted he wasn't sure since he hadn't experienced this in his past life, but quickly told himself to be more confident. As he thought that, the goddess of luck suddenly changed her expression, and the system informed him that she was interested in him. Songyun was surprised by the shift, and the system added that she was intrigued, having never seen a lucky swordsman before. Unsure of how to respond, Songyun simply said he had always been told he was lucky. Thinking it was a relief that the constellations seemed interested in forming a contract, Songyun decided to take his time and confirm it. Just then, the system notified him that the cleaner of a fallen dimension praised him for his hidden cruelty. The cleaner of a fallen dimension was a common constellation for slayers, so Songyun wondered if it appeared because he had killed the goblins so quickly. As he thought that, the system notified him that the pilgrim of grand space was curious about his true intentions. Songyun wasn't sure why it had shown up, but remembered it usually appeared to those with the potential to become saints. He then considered if it came because of the goddess of luck, who was known to be popular even among constellations. As he was thinking, the goddess of luck, while chatting with the others, turned to Songyun. The system informed him that she had no exclusive desires and said he could still form a contract with her later if he chose someone else. Songyun was surprised she would give him that kind of chance. An archer who could hit his target even when aiming at empty space. Hashimoto Yuki, the archer of miracles, was praised as the greatest. With blessings from the world, he never ran out of arrows. His power and high luck stat made some doubt his feats, but it was all real thanks to his contracts with two constellations, including the goddess of luck, who made the impossible possible. Sang-yoon laughed nervously and said he needed time to think, surprising the constellations. The system then told him the three insisted he ignore his doubts and choose freely, though one warned he might regret his choice. Sang-yoon was shocked by their words. He knew the goddess of luck was amazing, but if no others came later, this decision would shape his future. In his past life, only one constellation reached out to him after 10 years, the late bloomer model student. It had felt like salvation at the time, and despite his rough journey, Sang-yoon thought things would get better. But years passed, and nothing changed, not until he turned 55. He never truly understood what a constellation's power could be because of the ridiculous requirements the late bloomer had. Though constellation power was key to a player's growth, Sang-yoon never got to use it. Sang-yoon hadn't even used his past constellation's power. Yet thanks to the late bloomer model student, he was able to regress. He reminded himself to be grateful, but also cautious. He couldn't count on another chance like this. Looking at the three constellations, one symbolizing holy power, another destruction, and the last luck, Sang-yoon made his decision. He clicked the accept button, and the system confirmed the contract with the goddess of luck. She was surprised by his choice. The system added that even if he died, the contract would remain valid for 30 years. A being from another dimension watched the contract, while 15 friendly constellations congratulated Sang-yoon. However, 3 hostile ones, who had hoped to form a contract with him, declared they would do everything to stop his growth. Sang-yoon was stunned by the sudden hostility over his choice. Sang-yoon wondered why so many constellations were interested in him, but quickly changed the topic. He extended his hand to the goddess of luck and wished them both the best for their new contract. They shook hands, and the system confirmed that the goddess praised Sang-yoon for his wise choice. Just as Sang-yoon was about to speak, the system announced that the contract with the goddess of luck had activated. All attacks would now result in a critical hit. Artifacts of unique rank or higher would unlock hidden effects, and Sang-yoon would have a 100% chance to obtain artifact from middle bosses and bosses, even if their rank was low. Sang-yoon was stunned by the broken effects. The system then added that using the points from leveling up would allow Sang-yoon to increase his stats by 2 per point invested in luck, including all previously used bonus points. Sang-yoon was even more surprised by the additional effects and began to tear up, realizing his hard work was paying off. The goddess of luck then asked what he would do about the other constellation's offers. Sang-yoon calmly replied that it was fine and that the 2 constellations could leave. He needed to focus on his goddess. The other 2 constellations were shocked by his response. The system informed him that the Pilgrim of Grand Space would wait for their next meeting, while the Cleaner of a Fallen Dimension threatened to cut off Sang-yoon's head. The goddess of luck was pleased with Sang-yoon's decision, and he commented on her good mood. She praised him for standing his ground. Sang-yoon thought that with the goddess effects, he no longer had to worry about the near future, but he needed to stay calm for better opportunities ahead. Later, in dungeon number 101's final boss room, Sang-yoon was fighting the Goblin Lord on equal terms, and the goddess of luck was watching, surprised by the battle. Sang-yoon swung his great sword and taunted the Goblin Lord, challenging it to do better. He landed a powerful attack, but the Goblin Lord blocked it. Wasting no time, the Goblin Lord countered, forcing Sang-yoon to step back. The system then informed Sang-yoon that the Goblin Lord had inflicted him with the Overwhelm status ailment. Excited, Sang-yoon recognized the skill, noting that while it wasn't as deadly as stun, it reduced a target's motivation to fight. Sang-yoon quickly countered with his recovery skill, blocking the Goblin Lord's incoming attack and breaking free from the status effect. He thought to himself that it was expected, as the Goblin Lord's skill had clear limitations and was only useful against smaller mobs. As Sang-yoon thought about the situation, the system notified him that his recovery skill had removed the Overwhelm status ailment. He decided it was time to test his luck. Surprised that Sang-yoon had broken free, the Goblin Lord tried to use the skill again, but it had no effect. Wasting no time, Song-Yoon launched a powerful attack and taunted the Goblin Lord, saying its skill wouldn't work on him a second time. He then activated his Demon Bash skill, stunning the Goblin Lord for 2 seconds. During that time, Song-Yoon unleashed a series of attacks, extending the duration of the stun due to the skill's special conditions. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.